There was a boy who carved his name into stone. He was 17 years old, and his hands were shaking as he used his knife to scratch letters into the bridge's ancient wall. His name was Marcus, and he knew that in a few hours, maybe a few days, he would be dead. They all knew. 10,000 soldiers standing on a bridge that was about to become a graveyard. But Marcus wanted something to remain. Some proof that he had existed, that he had stood here, that he had mattered. So he carved his name deep into the stone, next to hundreds of other names that other soldiers had carved. A wall of names, a memorial written by men who were still alive but already saying goodbye. His older brother found him there, saw what he was doing,
the bridge of
and said
ancients
nothing.
is a strategic
Just put a hand on his
nightmare for
shoulder,
any invading
because there were
force.
no words left. No speeches about glory or honor that had not already been spoken. They were going to die on this bridge. All of them. And the only question was whether their deaths would mean anything. Whether holding this single piece of stone for as long as possible could save the kingdom behind them. 21 days. That is how long they held. 21 days of blood and steel and bodies piled so high they blocked the bridge. 21 days that became legend. Not because of victory, but because of sacrifice. This is the story of the river stand. Of how 10,000 defenders stopped an empire with one bridge. And it begins with a simple truth. Sometimes the difference between a kingdom's survival and its destruction is 50 yards of stone over running water. Do you know what a choke point is? It is a place where numbers do not matter. Where an army of 80,000 cannot bring all their strength to bear because only a few can fight at once. It is the great equalizer. The place where determination matters more than size. And this bridge, the Bridge of Ancients, was the perfect choke point. 50 yards long, 20 feet wide. The only crossing point over a river that was too deep to ford and too fast to swim. Behind it lay the kingdom's capital, 50 miles down the road. In front of it stood the empire's army. 80,000 soldiers who had already conquered 3 nations. Who believed they were unstoppable. Who looked at the bridge and saw a minor inconvenience. A few hours of work to clear the defenders and continue the march. They were wrong. Because the 10,000 soldiers standing on that bridge were not going to retreat. They were not going to surrender. They had been given one order by their king before he fled with the civilians to evacuate the capital. Hold the bridge. For as long as you can. Give us time. And they were going to obey that order. Even if it killed every single one of them. The kingdom had been at war for 2 years. The empire had come with promises of civilization and prosperity. When those promises were rejected, they came with armies instead. City after city had fallen. The kingdom's forces had fought bravely, but were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Now, the capital was the last stronghold. And between the empire and that capital stood the river. The Bridge of Ancients had been built centuries ago by engineers whose names were forgotten. It was a masterpiece of stone architecture, strong enough to support siege towers, built to last forever. And it had, through wars and floods, and time itself. Now it would serve one final purpose, not as a crossing, but as a wall. The kingdom's remaining army, 10,000 soldiers, had been ordered to the bridge. They were a mix of regular infantry, veterans from earlier battles, militia conscripted from surrounding towns, and volunteers who knew they were marching to their deaths but came anyway. Among them was Marcus and his brother, 2 farm boys who had never wanted to be soldiers. But when the call came, when the kingdom needed bodies to stand on that bridge, they went. Because someone had to. The empire's army arrived at the river on a gray morning. 80,000 strong. Infantry with shields and spears. Archers with longbows. Cavalry waiting for the bridge to be cleared so they could charge through. Siege engineers with rams and towers. And at the center, the emperor himself, watching from a silk pavilion, confident that this would be over by sunset. His generals looked at the bridge and saw the problem immediately. Only 20 feet wide. They could not bring their full force to bear. But they had 80,000 men. The defenders had 10,000. It was simple mathematics. Even at a choke point, numbers would eventually win. They sent heralds to demand surrender. The defenders' commander, a grizzled veteran named Captain Oren who had fought in 20 battles and survived them all, sent back a one-word reply. No. The empire's generals shrugged. They had expected that. They gave the order to attack. And the first wave began to march toward the bridge. 2,000 imperial soldiers advanced in formation. Shields locked. Spears forward. Disciplined and professional. They expected fierce resistance. They got something worse. They got a killing ground. The bridge was narrow. Only 10 men could stand shoulder to shoulder across it. The defenders had formed 3 ranks. The first rank held shields and short swords. The second rank held spears that reached over the first rank's shoulders. The third rank held spare weapons and waited to replace anyone who fell. It was not fancy. It was not clever. It was just mathematics. Only 10 imperial soldiers could engage the defenders at once. And behind those 10 defenders were 9,990 more. Captain Oren had organized the defense in rotations. Fresh troops every hour. No one fought until they were exhausted. The Empire did not have that luxury. Their soldiers in the back could not help, could not swing a sword or throw a spear. They could only watch as the men in front fought and died. The first assault lasted 4 hours. The Imperial soldiers pushed forward, trying to break through by sheer force. But the bridge would not allow it. Every time they killed a defender, another stepped forward to take his place. The bodies piled up at the center of the bridge, creating a barrier that made advancing even harder. Imperial soldiers climbed over corpses and were met with spears to the chest. The defenders did not shout war cries, did not waste energy on taunts. They just fought, killed, died, and were replaced. By the time the Empire called off the first assault, they had lost 800 men. The defenders had lost 150. The Emperor was not concerned. Those were acceptable losses. He had 80,000 men. He could afford to lose 800. He could afford to lose 8,000. Eventually, the defenders would run out of bodies. It was inevitable. He ordered a second assault, and a third, and a fourth. The first day ended with the Empire having lost 3,000 soldiers. The defenders had lost 400. Captain Oren walked the length of the bridge that night, stepping over bodies, checking on his troops. They were exhausted, bloodied, traumatized, but they were still standing. He found Marcus sitting against the bridge wall, staring at the name he had carved. The boy looked up at him and asked a question that had no good answer. How long can we hold? Captain Oren was honest. I do not know. Maybe a week. Maybe 2. Maybe longer if we are lucky. Marcus nodded. And then what? Oren did not answer. Because they both knew. Then they died. All of them. But if they held on long enough, the capital would be evacuated. The king would escape to the northern provinces and continue the resistance. The kingdom would survive. That was what they were buying with their lives. Time. Not victory. Just time. The second day was worse than the first. The Empire brought up archers. They fired volleys over the heads of their own infantry, trying to kill the defenders in the rear ranks. Captain Oren ordered shields raised. The arrows killed dozens, but not enough to break the defense. The Empire tried fire. Flaming arrows meant to burn the defenders' wooden shields. But the bridge was stone, and the defenders simply discarded burning shields and grabbed new ones. The Empire tried a battering ram, carried by 20 men, meant to smash through the defenders' line. It got halfway across the bridge before the defenders cut down the men carrying it. The ram fell into the river and was swept away. Every tactic the Empire tried failed, not because the defenders were brilliant strategists, but because the bridge would not allow anything fancy. It was just a narrow strip of stone, and on that stone, courage mattered more than cleverness. By the 5th day, the Empire had lost 10,000 men, 1/8 of their army. The Emperor was furious. He executed 2 generals for incompetence, ordered the attacks to continue around the clock. No rest, no pauses, just constant assault. The defenders adapted. They fought in shifts, half resting while half fought. Captain Oren created a system where soldiers rotated every 30 minutes instead of every hour. It was exhausting, but it kept them fresh enough to keep fighting. The bodies on the bridge had become a problem for both sides. The Empire sent workers to drag corpses away during lulls in the fighting. The defenders did the same. But there were always more bodies. Always more blood. The bridge's stones became slick with gore. Men slipped and fell and were killed before they could stand. The river below turned red. Literally red, stained by the blood of thousands. Marcus was injured on the 7th day. A spear thrust caught his shoulder. His brother pulled him back from the line, bandaged the wound, and told him to rest. But Marcus refused. He wrapped cloth around the wound and returned to the rotation. Because everyone was injured now. Everyone was bleeding and broken and running on nothing but will. If wounded men stopped fighting, there would be no one left to hold the line. So they fought through pain, through infection, through fever. They fought because stopping meant dying, and dying meant the bridge would fall, and if the bridge fell, the kingdom died with it. On the 10th day, the empire changed tactics. They stopped trying to break through. Instead, they tried to go around. They sent engineers upstream to build rafts and boats. They would cross the river away from the bridge and attack the defenders from behind. Captain Oren had expected this. He had sent 50 men to patrol the riverbanks and destroy any crossing attempts. It was not enough. The empire was too numerous. They managed to get 500 soldiers across the river 3 miles upstream. Captain Oren made a decision that haunted him for the rest of his life, which was not much longer. He pulled 1,000 defenders off the bridge and sent them to deal with the flanking force. That left 9,000 on the bridge. Still more than enough to hold the choke point. But it thinned the rotations, made the exhaustion worse. The 1,000 soldiers caught up with the flanking force and destroyed it in a brutal fight. But they lost 300 men doing it. And when the survivors returned to the bridge, they brought news that more crossing attempts were being organized. The empire was learning, adapting. By the 14th day, both sides were operating on the edge of collapse. The empire had lost 30,000 men, more than a third of their army. The emperor was screaming at his generals, threatening to execute them all. But he could not retreat. To withdraw now, after such losses, would be humiliating, would make him look weak, would inspire other kingdoms to rebel. So the attacks continued. The defenders had lost 3,000 men, almost a third of their force. The remaining 7,000 were barely human anymore. They did not sleep. They did not eat much. They just fought and rested and fought again. Captain Oren knew they could not hold much longer. The empire's crossing attempts were increasing. Soon they would succeed. The bridge would be surrounded, and then it would fall. He sent a messenger to the capital, asked how much more time they needed. The reply came back. 4 more days. Just 4 more days, and the evacuation would be complete. Oren looked at his exhausted soldiers and wondered if they had 4 days left in them. The 18th day brought despair. The empire succeeded in getting 2,000 soldiers across the river 5 miles downstream. They began marching toward the bridge's rear. Captain Oren sent 2,000 defenders to intercept them. That left 5,000 holding the bridge. The mathematics were getting untenable. The intercepting force met the flankers in a field 2 miles from the bridge. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, both forces were annihilated. Fewer than 100 defenders survived and made it back to the bridge. Captain Oren now had 5,100 soldiers left, and the empire still had 50,000. The end was near. Everyone knew it. But the message from the capital said the same thing. Hold. Just a little longer. 3 more days. On the 20th day, the empire brought up their siege towers. Massive wooden structures that could roll right up to the defenders' line and drop soldiers directly into the rear ranks. Captain Oren watched them being built and knew they were finished. The towers would end the stalemate, would turn the bridge into a slaughter. He called his officers together and told them the truth. We cannot hold against those towers. We have maybe 1 more day, maybe less, but we can do one last thing. We can deny them the bridge entirely. The officers understood immediately. They were going to destroy it, collapse the bridge, and take away the empire's easy crossing. It would buy more time, maybe weeks, if the empire had to build their own bridge. But it also meant that everyone still on the bridge when it collapsed would die. Every single one. Captain Oren asked for volunteers to stay and collapse the bridge. All 5,000 soldiers raised their hands. Because they had come here to die. They had known it from the beginning. This was just choosing the manner of their death. The engineers worked through the night. They identified the bridge's key support structures, placed explosives and weakened stone, prepared the bridge to fall. Captain Oren sent a message to the capital. Tomorrow, we will collapse the bridge. The evacuation is complete. The king is safe. Your sacrifice saved the kingdom. Every soldier will be remembered. The message came back, and the defenders read it, and felt something they had not felt in weeks. Relief. Not because they were saved, but because it had meant something. They had not died for nothing. The kingdom would survive. That was enough. The 21st day began with the Empire rolling their siege towers toward the bridge. Captain Oren waited until they were committed, until thousands of Imperial soldiers were crowded onto the bridge, pushing the towers forward, certain that victory was finally within reach. And then he gave the order. The explosives detonated. The support structures cracked. And the Bridge of Ancients, which had stood for centuries, which had never fallen to time or war or flood, collapsed. 50 yards of stone dropped into the river, taking 10,000 men with it. Defenders and attackers alike. The river swallowed them all. Marcus was on the bridge when it fell. He had time for one final thought as the stone gave way beneath his feet. His name, carved into the wall. Would it survive? Would someone find it someday and know that he had been here? Then the water took him, and he was gone. The Empire stared at the wreckage in silence. Their siege towers were destroyed. Thousands of their soldiers were dead, and the bridge was gone. The Emperor, watching from his pavilion, finally understood. He had been playing. The defenders had never intended to hold forever, just long enough, and they had succeeded. The capital was evacuated. The king was safe. The war would continue, and the Empire had wasted a month and 40,000 soldiers on a bridge that no longer existed. He ordered a withdrawal. They would have to build a crossing. But by the time they did, the kingdom would have reorganized. The war was far from over, but the kingdom had survived because of 10,000 soldiers who gave everything for time. News of the river stand spread across the world. It became a legend. The 10,000 who held the bridge, who died to save their kingdom. Statues were built. Songs were sung. And decades later, when the river was finally forded again, when engineers began to build a new bridge, they found something. Names, carved into stones that had survived the collapse. Thousands of names, including one that reads simply, Marcus, age 17. He stood here. The stones were recovered, preserved, built into a memorial, and every name was recorded. Because the kingdom never forgot. Never forget the price that was paid. Never forgot that their survival was bought with the lives of soldiers who knew they would not see the dawn. The Empire eventually withdrew from the region. The cost of the war had become too high, and the river stand had broken their momentum, proven that they could be resisted. Other kingdoms saw and took heart. Within a generation, the Empire's expansion halted, and historians would point to the bridge as the turning point. The place where an empire learned that conquest has limits, that some prices are too high, that 10,000 determined defenders can stop 80,000 invaders if they are willing to pay the ultimate cost. This is the story of the river stand, of how one bridge held a kingdom together, of how 10,000 soldiers became immortal, not because they won, but because they chose to die so others could live. Marcus is still there. His name is carved.